A scream cuts through the autumn air like broken glass. In a shopping plaza parking lot, emergency responders pry open an SUV door. Inside, two people are trapped, stuck together in ways that defy explanation. "What the hell happened here?" a rookie officer mutters. "Eyes up, work," his captain barks. The woman sobs desperately. "Please help us. We can't move." Phones capture everything. Within hours, shock and glue incident trends across social media. A city employee's career crumbles. A marriage dies in public view. But this isn't where the story begins. It starts 3 weeks earlier, in a quiet kitchen where a librarian named Mary Miller discovers a silver tube in her husband's car. What she does next will shock everyone, including herself. They had no idea what was about to happen. If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments. Where in the world are you listening from? Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now, let's get started. Mary Ann Miller pressed her fingertips against the cool library window. October light filtered through yellowing maple leaves, casting gentle shadows across her desk. At 45, she had perfected the art of quiet mornings. Coffee at 6:30. Budget spreadsheets by 7. The same rhythm, day after day. Her phone buzzed softly. A text from Scott. "Regional meeting ran late again. Don't wait up." She set the phone down and returned to her work. Numbers never lied. Unlike people, they stayed exactly where you put them. The Black Hawk County Library felt more like home than home these days. Here, between the worn spines of donated novels and the whispered questions of elderly patrons, Mary found purpose. She knew every creak in the old building's floor, every temperamental light switch that needed coaxing. "Mrs. Miller?" A young mother approached her desk, toddler clinging to her leg. "Could you help me find something about divorce?" Mary's fingers paused over her keyboard. She pointed toward the legal section, voice steady as always. "Third aisle, middle shelf. Take your time." The woman nodded gratefully. Mary watched her walk away, the toddler's small hand clutching a picture book about families. At 5 o'clock, Mary locked the library doors and drove home to their Tudor-style house on Elm Street. The driveway was empty as expected. Scott wouldn't return until after 10, as usual. She heated leftover soup and sat at their dining table, designed for 8 but occupied by 1. The silence felt thick tonight. Even the grandfather clock seemed to tick more slowly. After dinner, she decided to clean Scott's SUV. A small gesture, she told herself. Something wives do. The autumn air was crisp against her cheeks. She gathered cleaning supplies from the garage, humming an old song their son used to love. David was grown now, living in Portland with his new wife. Their weekly phone calls had dwindled to monthly check-ins. She opened the passenger door and began vacuuming the floor mats. Her hand brushed something small and hard beneath the seat. A silver hair clip, delicate and unfamiliar. Mary held it up to the porch light. She didn't wear hair clips. Never had. Her chest tightened, but she continued cleaning. Maybe it belonged to a coworker. Scott gave rides sometimes, didn't he? She moved to the glove compartment, organizing registration papers and insurance documents. Her fingers found something else. A small tube, silver and sleek. She pulled it out and read the label carefully. Personal lubricant. The words blurred for a moment. She blinked, reading again. The tube was half empty, warm from the heated compartment. Mary sat in the passenger seat, holding the evidence in her palm. She thought about their first apartment, 23 years ago. Scott had raised his coffee mug in a toast. "No secrets between us, Mary. That's my promise." She remembered believing him. She remembered believing in them. Now she sat in a car that smelled faintly of unfamiliar perfume, holding proof of promises broken. The night air felt colder suddenly. Hope whispered in her mind maybe there was an explanation. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe routine was still a kind of love, even when it felt hollow. But reality answered louder. Scott's Friday meetings never appeared on the city calendar. His shirts came home smelling of musk she didn't recognize. His phone face down during dinner, buzzing with messages he never shared. Mary pulled out her phone and took a clear photo of the tube. Her hands didn't shake. She felt strangely calm, as if she were documenting damaged books at the library. Evidence required preservation. She returned everything to its place and finished cleaning the car. When Scott came home at 10:15, she was reading in bed, glasses perched on her nose, book open to a story about second chances. "How was your meeting?" she asked without looking up. "Long. Complicated zoning stuff." He kissed her forehead absently. "Thanks for cleaning the car." "You're welcome." He disappeared into the bathroom. Mary listened to the sound of running water and tried to remember when they'd stopped talking about real things. When had their conversations become a series of polite exchanges between strangers who shared a mortgage? She closed her book and turned off the lamp. In the darkness, she stared at the ceiling and made a decision. She wouldn't confront him tonight. She wouldn't cry or scream or throw things. Instead, she would learn. She would plan. She would remember who she used to be before she became half of something that was already broken. The grandfather clock chimed 11 times. Mary closed her eyes and began to count the reasons she deserved better than this. Mary's phone buzzed during her lunch break. Scott's message appeared on the screen. Late again, big permit review. Don't wait up. She set down her sandwich and opened the city website on her laptop. The planning department calendar showed no meetings scheduled for today. No permit reviews. No regional conferences. Her chest tightened, but her fingers remained steady as she typed. She searched for the exact brand name printed on the silver tube. Intimate Solutions Personal Lubricant. The manufacturer's website loaded slowly on the library's connection. She studied every detail. The label font. The silver cap's threading pattern. The product dimensions listed in the specifications. Her librarian training kicked in research required thoroughness. After work, she drove to Ace Hardware on 5th Street. The store smelled of paint and sawdust, comfortingly familiar. She walked past the tool displays and found the adhesives section. "Can I help you find something?" asked a teenage clerk with paint-stained fingers. "Industrial superglue. Something strong." The boy led her to a shelf lined with various adhesives. Mary compared sizes and colors until she found what she needed. A small tube, silver-capped, nearly identical to the one in Scott's glove compartment. At home, she placed both tubes side by side on the kitchen counter. The superglue was slightly shorter, but the silver caps matched perfectly. She practiced unscrewing each one, timing how long the swap would take. 20 seconds, maybe 30 if she was careful. She waited until midnight. The house creaked around her as she made her way to the garage. Penlight gripped in her sweaty palm. The SUV's interior smelled of Scott's cologne and something sweeter underneath. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. She opened the glove compartment and retrieved the original tube. The super glue felt heavier in her palm, cold metal warming under her touch. She unscrewed the cap of the lubricant and poured the contents into a plastic bag. Then she filled the empty tube with industrial adhesive, careful not to spill a drop. The smell was sharp and chemical, nothing like the original's neutral scent. "If I'm wrong, nothing happens," she whispered to the darkness. "If I'm right, the lie reveals itself." She screwed the cap back on and placed the tube exactly where she'd found it. The empty bag went into her jacket pocket. Evidence removed, trap set. Back in the kitchen, she washed her hands 3 times with dish soap. The chemical smell lingered on her fingertips, a reminder of what she'd done. Mary sat at the dining table and stared at her reflection in the dark window. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. When had she learned to plan like this? When had quiet Mary Miller become someone capable of calculated moves? Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes you have to protect yourself, honey, even from the people you love." She'd never understood that advice until now. Mary climbed the stairs to their bedroom, where Scott slept peacefully, unaware that his world had shifted. She lay down beside him, listening to his steady breathing, and waited. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. She had learned patience from 23 years of library work. Some books took time to check out, but eventually everyone returned what they'd borrowed. She closed her eyes and dreamed of silver tubes and broken promises, of choices that couldn't be undone. Tomorrow she would continue being the quiet librarian everyone expected her to be. But tonight she had become something else entirely. The whispers started at First Methodist on Sunday morning. Mary felt eyes following her as she walked down the center aisle, though no one spoke directly to her. Mrs. Patterson, the pastor's wife, offered a tight smile and looked away quickly. During coffee hour, conversations quieted when Mary approached. She heard fragments, Scott's overtime, those Friday meetings. Poor Mary, she probably doesn't know. But she did know. That was the difference now. Monday brought a mortgage escrow notice in the mail. Their insurance premium had increased by 18%. Mary spread the bills across the kitchen table, organizing them by color: red for urgent, yellow for due soon, green for manageable. There was more red than green these days. Scott arrived home earlier than usual, carrying a folder thick with papers. He kissed her cheek and sat across from her at the table. "We need to talk about this," he said, tapping the mortgage notice. "I've been looking into a HELOC, home equity line of credit, just in case we need extra cushion." Mary's pen paused over her budget calculations. "More debt? Not debt. Security." Scott's voice carried the practiced tone he used for zoning board meetings. "Property values are up. We have options now. The word maybe formed on her lips. She heard it starting to emerge, soft and agreeable, the way she always responded to Scott's financial plans. Then she caught herself. Maybe, she said aloud, and immediately tasted something sour. The word felt wrong in her mouth, like spoiled milk. Scott smiled, mistaking her hesitation for agreement. I'll call the bank tomorrow. That night, after Scott fell asleep, Mary sat at her laptop and researched home equity loans. The interest rates, the risks, the stories of families who'd lost everything when property values dropped. She thought about Scott's recent absences, his evasive answers about overtime pay that never appeared on his pay stubs. Did she really want to tie their home's equity to his promises? Tuesday morning, she called the bank herself. I'd like to add security alerts to our accounts, she told the customer service representative. Any applications for credit lines should require both signatures. Of course, Mrs. Miller. We'll set up dual authorization immediately. Mary changed their online banking passwords too. She added two-factor authentication, set up separate statements to be mailed to the library, and created a private checking account for her librarian salary. Her phone buzzed with a text from Scott, working late again. Don't wait up, Mary replied. Be safe. But her tone had shifted. From worry to wariness, from trust to careful distance. She practiced saying no in the mirror that evening. No, Scott, that won't work for us. I need to think about it. The words felt strange in her mouth, like speaking a foreign language after years of silence. At the library Wednesday morning, she helped an elderly man research legal aid services. He was separating from his wife after 40 years of marriage. Hardest thing I ever did, he told her quietly. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Mary nodded and handed him a list of resources. Sometimes we have to protect ourselves, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. That evening, she organized all their important documents, birth certificates, insurance policies, account statements. She made copies and stored them in a safety deposit box at a different bank, one where Scott had no access. Her mother had always said, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Mary was learning the wisdom in those words. Thursday night, Scott came home with brochures from the bank. He spread them across the dinner table like a sales presentation. Look at this, Mary. We could access up to $80,000. Home improvements, vacation, whatever we want. Mary studied the glossy papers. What if we lose the house? Scott laughed, the sound hollow in the quiet dining room. Come on, honey. That's not going to happen. I've got steady work. You've got the library. We're fine. But were they? Mary looked at her husband, really looked at him for the first time in months. When had his confidence started to sound like arrogance? When had his reassurances begun to feel like dismissals? I need time to think, she said. Scott's smile faltered. Time to think about what? It's just paperwork. Nothing's ever just paperwork, Mary replied, especially when it involves our home. She gathered the brochures and stacked them neatly. I'll let you know what I decide. For the first time in years, Scott looked uncertain. Okay, sure. Whatever you think is best. Mary nodded and carried the dishes to the kitchen. As she washed plates and glasses, she listened to the house settling around them. The silence felt different now. Not empty, but full of possibilities she was just beginning to understand. She was learning to trust her own voice again. And that voice was telling her to be very, very careful. The call came in at 7:30 on Friday evening. Dispatch crackled through Officer Jake Morrison's radio as he patrolled the east side of Cedar Falls. Unit 47, respond to Millfield Shopping Plaza parking lot. Possible medical emergency involving a vehicle. Jake flipped on his lights and accelerated through the autumn dusk. The shopping plaza sat at the edge of town, mostly empty except for a few scattered cars near the grocery store. He spotted the SUV immediately. A small crowd had gathered around the vehicle, their faces lit by cell phone cameras. Someone was screaming. Jake pushed through the onlookers. Step back, please. Everyone stepped back. The SUV's windows were fogged. Jake approached the driver's side and peered through the glass. What he saw made him stop short. Jesus, he muttered, then called for backup. Unit 47 to dispatch. I'm going to need fire rescue and paramedics, and possibly a supervisor. Inside the vehicle, a man and woman were locked in an intimate embrace. But something was wrong. Very wrong. They weren't moving naturally. They seemed stuck together. The woman's sobs echoed through the glass. Help us, she pleaded. We can't separate. Jake had seen domestic disputes, overdoses, and car wrecks in his 5 years on the force. But nothing like this. Fire Chief Rodriguez arrived within minutes, followed by 2 paramedics. They assessed the situation through the window before attempting to open the door. Looks like some kind of adhesive, Rodriguez said grimly. Industrial strength from the looks of it. It took 20 minutes and 3 different solvents to free the couple from each other and from the car's interior. The man was Scott Miller, a city employee Jake recognized from zoning board meetings. The woman wasn't his wife. Both victims were transported to Cedar Falls General, covered in blankets and shame. But the damage was already done. Cell phone videos had captured everything. By 9 o'clock, just a glue incident was trending on local social media. Local news picked up the story within hours. Bizarre accident leaves 2 people stuck together in parking lot. The reporter was careful not to mention names, but in a town of 30,000, anonymity was impossible. At her house on Elm Street, Mary Miller sat at her kitchen table listening to the radio. The kettle on the stove began to whistle, a high, sharp sound that cut through the evening air. She didn't turn it off immediately. She let it scream for a full minute, the sound filling the quiet house like a siren's call. When she finally rose to silence it, her movements were calm and deliberate. She poured hot water into her teacup and added a bag of chamomile tea. The steam rose between her fingers, warming her face. Her phone buzzed with calls from neighbors, friends, concerned church members. She let them all go to voicemail. The radio continued its coverage. The couple was taken to Cedar Falls General, where they were treated and released. The cause of the unusual accident remains under investigation. Mary sipped her tea and watched the autumn darkness settle over her neighborhood. Porch lights flickered on in houses where families were sitting down to dinner, where husbands came home when they said they would, where promises still meant something. She felt no satisfaction in what had happened, no sense of victory or revenge, just a deep, quiet sadness for the life she'd thought she was living and the truth that had finally forced its way into the light. The kettle sat cooling on the stove, its whistle silenced. Mary turned off the radio and climbed the stairs to her bedroom. Tomorrow she would face whatever came next. But tonight she would sleep alone in a bed that had felt empty for months anyway. The truth, as her mother used to say, had a way of making itself known. Sometimes gently, sometimes with the force of a scream that couldn't be ignored. Mary turned off the lights and lay down in the darkness. Outside, the sirens had finally stopped wailing. Mary sat in the empty kitchen, her tea growing cold. The silence pressed against her ears like deep water. She closed her eyes and let the memories surface. Their first apartment had been tiny. 1 bedroom above Mrs. Chen's bakery with a radiator that clanged all night and a bathroom shared with the family next door. But it had been theirs. Scott was 24 then, fresh from community college with a planning degree and dreams of redesigning small towns. Mary was 22, recently hired at the library, her head full of story endings where love conquered all. No secrets, Scott had said that first morning, raising his mismatched coffee mug in a toast. They couldn't afford matching dishes then, but somehow their differences had seemed charming instead of broken. No secrets, Mary had echoed, believing in the promise like she believed in happy endings. Her mother had visited that first winter, bringing casseroles and unsolicited advice. Mary could still hear her voice, sharp with experience. Respect is a daily chore, like dishes. You stop doing it, everything gets dirty. Mary had laughed then. Oh, Mom, Scott's not like Dad. But years had a way of wearing down good intentions. Scott's promotions came with longer hours, client dinners, weekend conferences. Mary's library work remained steady but modest. The distance between them grew gradually, like a hairline crack spreading through foundation. She remembered the exact moment she'd realized something had changed. 3 years ago, during their son David's wedding, Scott had spent the reception on his phone, handling what he called a zoning emergency. Mary had danced with their new son-in-law, while Scott negotiated permit deadlines in the hotel lobby. Your husband works too hard, David's bride had said kindly. Mary had smiled and agreed, but privately wondered when work had become more important than their only child's wedding. The medical bills started after that. Nothing serious, just the accumulated wear of middle age. Scott's back surgery, Mary's thyroid medication. Co-pays that chipped away at their savings like water-eroding stone. Mary had started clipping coupons, switching to generic brands, keeping the thermostat lower in winter. Small economies that added up to survival. She'd believed patience could fix the distance between them. That if she waited long enough, complained little enough, Scott would remember the promises they'd made in that tiny apartment above the bakery. Instead, she'd learned that boundaries fixed disrespect. That truth had weight. That silence could be chosen rather than imposed. Mary opened her eyes and looked around their current kitchen. Granite countertops Scott had insisted they needed. Stainless steel appliances that reflected her solitary figure back at her. She stood and wiped the counter until it gleamed, her reflection sharp in the polished surface. Her breath came easier now, steady and sure. The woman in the granite was someone she was just beginning to recognize. Monday morning brought reporters to the library. Mary watched them through the front windows as she unlocked the doors, their cameras and microphones creating a small crowd on the steps. "Mrs. Miller," one called out. "Any comment on Friday's incident?" Mary faced them with the same composure she used for difficult patrons. "No statement," she said firmly, then stepped inside and locked the door behind her. Her supervisor, Eleanor Wade, appeared within minutes. "Mary, honey, take the day off if you need to. We can manage." "I'd rather work," Mary replied. "Thank you." At noon, her phone rang. Human resources from the city. Scott had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. "Standard procedure," they assured her. "Nothing personal." Mary thanked them and hung up. By Wednesday, the story had burned through social media and moved on to the next scandal. But the damage lingered. The woman from the SUV had resigned from her position at the Chamber of Commerce and left town. The rumor mill slowed, then clogged with half-truths and speculation. Thursday afternoon, Mary's phone buzzed with a banking alert. Someone had attempted to add her name to a new credit card application. She declined the request digitally, then called the bank to confirm the block. "Ma'am, the application was initiated by your husband," the representative explained. "I know," Mary said. "That's why I'm declining it." Friday evening, Scott's text appeared on her screen. "We need to talk." Mary stared at the message for a full minute before responding. "About a counselor, yes." He arrived home at 6 o'clock, earlier than he'd been in months. His face was pale, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Mary had prepared for this moment. She'd spent hours writing, revising, practicing the words until they felt natural in her mouth. Scott sat across from her at the dining table, the same spot where he'd spread those loan brochures just weeks before. How long ago that seemed now. "Mary, She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "These are my terms." Scott picked up the paper and read silently. Mary watched his face change as he absorbed each line. "Separate finances. No joint loans or credit applications. Complete calendar transparency. Marriage counseling or legal separation within 60 days. "You did this," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Mary met his gaze steadily. "I chose not to be erased." Scott's anger flared first, then deflated like a punctured balloon. "How long have you known?" "About the affair? Months. About the lies? Years." Mary's voice remained calm, though her hands trembled slightly. "I gave you chances to tell the truth." "Mary, please. We can work this out. I made mistakes, but—" "These aren't mistakes," Mary interrupted. "They're choices. You chose someone else. You chose deception. You chose to risk our home with financial schemes I never agreed to." Scott stared at the paper, his shoulders sagging. "What do you want from me? Honesty, respect, or a clean divorce?" The words hung between them like smoke from an extinguished candle. Mary felt lighter having spoken them aloud, as if she'd been holding her breath for years and could finally exhale. "I never meant for it to go this far," Scott said quietly. "But you meant for it to go somewhere," Mary replied. "That's enough." They sat in silence for several minutes. The grandfather clock chimed 7 times, marking another hour in a marriage that had been dying by degrees for far too long. "I'll start looking for an apartment," Scott said finally. Mary nodded. "I think that's best." After he left the room, Mary remained at the table, staring at the contract she'd written. The reversal was complete. She was no longer the passive wife waiting for her husband to remember his promises. She was the woman setting the terms. The counseling sessions began 3 weeks later in Dr. Sarah Chen's office on Maple Street. Mary chose the therapist herself, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a reputation for straight talk. Scott arrived punctually for the first session, wearing his best suit and a practiced expression of remorse. He apologized for his lapses in judgment and spoke about recommitting to their marriage. Mary listened quietly, then addressed Dr. Chen directly. "I don't accept that frame," she said. "These weren't lapses. They were deliberate choices made over months." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Can you tell me more about what you need, Mary?" "Honesty about where he was and with whom. Access to all financial accounts. Genuine accountability, not performance." Scott shifted uncomfortably. "I'm trying to make things right." "Making things right means accepting consequences," Mary replied, "not managing them." After the session, Mary drove to the legal aid office downtown. She met with Sandra Martinez, a volunteer attorney who specialized in family law. "I'm not ready to file," Mary explained, "but I want to understand my options." Sandra outlined Mary's rights regarding property division, spousal support, and asset protection. Mary took careful notes, asking practical questions about timelines and procedures. Knowledge is power, Sandra said as they concluded. Even if you never use it. Mary returned home to find Scott packing boxes in the garage. They worked around each other politely, like strangers sharing a bus stop. The church elder called, Scott mentioned without looking up. Pastor Williams wants to visit. That's fine, Mary said. But I'll meet with him alone first. Pastor Williams arrived Thursday evening with a thermos of coffee and genuine concern. Mary appreciated that he didn't launch into platitudes about forgiveness or marital duty. How are you holding up? He asked simply. I'm finding my footing, Mary replied. It's harder than I expected, but necessary. They talked about faith and resilience, about the difference between forgiveness and restoration. Pastor Williams offered prayer, not pressure. Mary accepted gratefully. Friday brought good news from the library. Eleanor Wade had secured a modest raise for Mary's position, effective immediately. The extra $160 per month wouldn't solve all her problems, but it would offset the insurance increase. Mary updated her beneficiary forms that afternoon, removing Scott's name from her retirement accounts and life insurance. She added her cousin Rachel as her medical proxy and emergency contact. These small acts of independence felt both terrifying and liberating, like learning to walk again after a long illness. Saturday morning, Scott loaded the last of his belongings into a rented truck. He was moving to his brother's spare room temporarily, though they both understood nothing about this situation was temporary. I'll keep going to counseling, he said as he prepared to leave. Doctor, Chen thinks individual therapy might help too. Mary nodded. That sounds wise. They stood in the driveway for a moment, 23 years of marriage reduced to an awkward goodbye. Mary felt sadness but not regret. This ending had been inevitable. She just finally stopped avoiding it. Mary, Scott said quietly, I really am sorry. I know, she replied, but sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Actions do. After he left, Mary walked through the empty house, room by room. The silence felt different now, not oppressive, but spacious, full of possibilities rather than absence. She made herself dinner and ate it slowly, savoring the flavor of food she'd chosen and prepared for herself alone. Later, she sat in her favorite chair and read until her eyes grew tired. Before bed, she checked the locks on all the doors, something she'd never needed to do when Scott lived here. The gesture felt protective rather than fearful. Tomorrow she would continue building whatever came next. Tonight she would sleep peacefully in a bed that belonged entirely to her. For the first time in years, Mary Miller was exactly where she chose to be. Morning light painted silver ribbons across the Cedar River as Mary walked the trail before work. October had given way to November, and the air carried the crisp promise of winter. Her breath formed small clouds that dissipated quickly in the growing warmth of dawn. At the library, she found Eleanor arranging a display of donated books. An elderly woman stood nearby, studying the volunteer schedule posted on the bulletin board. Excuse me, Rasum, the woman said. I'm Ruth Patterson. I just moved here from Davenport. My husband passed last spring, and I'm looking for ways to stay busy. Mary smiled, genuinely pleased. I'm Mary Miller, head librarian. We'd love to have your help. As they discussed Ruth's background and interests, Mary felt something she'd almost forgotten, the simple joy of connecting with another person without pretense or performance. Ruth had been a school librarian for 30 years. Her eyes lit up when she talked about introducing children to their first favorite books. Would you like to help with our story time? Mary asked. We have a wonderful group of preschoolers every Tuesday morning. Ruth's face brightened. Oh, I'd love that. Mary showed Ruth around the children's section, explaining their programs and procedures. As they worked together shelving picture books, Ruth shared stories from her decades in education. Mary found herself laughing, actually laughing for the first time in months. During her lunch break, Mary opened her desk drawer and looked at the small silver tube she'd kept there since the incident. Not the original tube, but a new one she'd purchased as a reminder. Not of what she'd done, but of what she'd learned about herself. A teenage girl approached the reference desk with her grandmother in tow. Excuse me, the girl said shyly. My grandma lost her job at the factory. Do you have books about finding work when you're older? Mary felt her heart warm. Of course. Let me show you what we have. She guided them to the career section, pulling books about resume writing, interview skills, and age discrimination in the workplace. The grandmother looked embarrassed, but Mary spoke to her with the same respect she'd show any patron. These situations are more common than people think, Mary said gently. You're being smart by researching your options. After they left with an armload of resources, Mary felt a deep sense of purpose. This was what she did best, helping people navigate difficult transitions with dignity and hope. That afternoon, a postcard arrived in the mail. The front showed Portland's skyline. David had written on the back, "Heard about you and Dad. Proud of you, Mom. Call when you're ready to talk." Mary tucked the card into her purse, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Her son understood. That mattered more than she'd expected. Her phone buzzed with a text from Scott. "Finished first solo session with Dr. Chen. Making some progress on understanding my choices. Hope your week is going well." Mary replied, "Glad therapy is helping. Take care." The exchange felt civil without being intimate, respectful without false warmth. Perhaps this was what healthy boundaries look like, clear lines that protected without punishing. That evening, Mary made herself a simple dinner: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a glass of white wine. She ate slowly, listening to jazz on the radio and watching the last light fade from her kitchen window. After dinner, she opened a donated novel and wrote carefully in the front cover, "To those who redraw their lines, there is always time to begin again." She would donate the book back to the library's collection tomorrow. Someone would find it, perhaps when they needed exactly that message. Mary cleaned up her dishes and prepared for bed. As she filled the kettle for tomorrow morning's tea, she noticed how quiet the house felt. Not empty now, but peaceful. Like a book that had found its proper ending. She turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to her bedroom. Through the window, she could see stars appearing in the clear November sky, distant points of light holding their positions in the vast darkness. Truth, she thought, had its own weight and substance. It didn't need to be defended or explained. It simply was, constant as starlight, reliable as dawn. Mary Miller pulled the covers up to her chin and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh opportunities to help others, small moments of grace to be noticed and appreciated. For now, she had learned perhaps the most important lesson of all, that a life rebuilt on honesty, however difficult, was infinitely more valuable than one maintained through comfortable lies. The kettle sat silent on the stove, ready for morning.